This is the Book Deal Podcast, a podcast all about inspiring and motivating writers.
Where we interview seasoned and debut authors about their own writing, from the blank page to the book deal and beyond.
We hope these stories will help you to stay positive, focused, and carve your own path forward.
I'm Madeline Cleary.
And I'm Tina Strong.
And this is the Book Deal Podcast. The Book Deal Podcast acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and waters which it's recorded on, and pays respect to their elders past, present, and emerging.
Our guest this week on the Book Deal Podcast is the ever knowledgeable Katherine Collette. You may know Katherine from her books The Helpline, The Competition, and most recently her middle grade series The Two Tall Tales of Alma Best, or from her many years as one half of the podcasting duo from the First Time podcast, or through her most recent endeavour as a book coach. Katherine Collette is an absolute wealth of information on all things writing, from practical tips on the craft of writing, how to turn writing into a career, publishing and marketing advice, and of course, how to work towards the book deal. I was so excited to interview Katherine because we had so many questions to ask her. So many, in fact, I didn't get around to asking them all. Hopefully, I can secure her for another interview really soon. Writers from all stages of their writing journey will find gold within Katherine's candid responses as she shares the ups and downs of her own writing journey, how a book coach can help you achieve your goals, and the common themes she finds amongst emerging writers. Katherine Collette, welcome to the Book Deal Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. This podcast has the best name. You guys really nailed it with the name.
Oh, well, we like it to kind of do what it says on the tin, is like talk about the book deal.
It's a great podcast as well. It has the added benefit of having it.
Yeah, it's all about the title. Well, we are being super excited to have you here as a guest on the pod for many reasons. One is you are a wealth of publishing knowledge, not only from your long-time podcast, The First Time, which was all about your journey as a debut author, but you're also now a book coach, and you have 3, soon to be 4 books published. All up. So we know our listeners are going to get so much out of this interview with you, as am I.
I hope so.
Absolutely. First, let's start with your latest book, The Two Tall Tales of Alma Best, which also has a great name. Congratulations. Released in September?
Yes, September. So it's been out for a little while.
Yeah, middle grade book with HarperCollins.
Mm-hmm.
So we share a publisher now, which is cool.
It's very cool. HarperCollins is a big publisher too, working in adult and kids spaces.
Mm-hmm, it sure is. So because I'm a debut author, obviously, one of the things that I need to get my head around, and all authors have to really, emerging authors, aspiring authors, is the one-liner, the one-line pitch that sells your book. So, Katherine, give us your one-liner.
Oh God. And I talk to people about this. So it's sort of maximal pressure. The one-liner that they use on marketing stuff is tall girl from a small town. So it is about a tall girl from a small town who hates basketball and ends up playing basketball. That's a terrible pitch. I wish I had pre-prepared a bit more. An interesting thing though, because pitching is a little bit top of mind for me. I'm doing a group coaching program at the moment. In a couple of weeks, we're going to talk pitching. I think that the query letter and the pitch that people put in the query letter when they're shopping around for an agent or publisher gets so much airtime. When you do a verbal pitch, often or sometimes people will just read their query letter aloud. So they might just do this is a heartwarming and hilarious tale for fans of The Wimpy Kid or something else, which in a verbal pitch is quite an odd thing to do. So one of the things I always say to people is the query letter pitch or the written pitch is very different from a verbal pitch. But I haven't really showcased my best efforts in giving you my...
Well, no, it's good. It's very comforting. It's actually really comforting because, I kind of freeze when people ask me to. I'm like, it's about a girl that lives in a zoo. I feel like that captures so much.
Line. feel like that's all you need. I often say that it's a tall girl in a small town, and it combines my two great loves of basketball and sewage farms.
Yep. That is perfect. And kids, if it's for kids, I'll be like, oh, sewage farms, basketball and sewage farms. Can't get much better than that. See, that's a great one. It's perfect. All right. Well, I wish I had signed up for your coaching course because I'm really keen on that pitching session. Um, so, but this is the first time you've had a kids book published, isn't it? Because before you were adults.
So my first two books were adult books, and then I was sitting down to write a third book during COVID, and I live in Melbourne. We had a lot of lockdowns in Melbourne. I think a lot of writers through COVID, whether they were here or not, felt a lot of creative malaise. And I remember thinking the idea of an adult book was just too hard. And I had been sitting on a sewage farm concept for a while. And so I thought I'd write a middle grade book because my kids are of that middle grade age group. And so I wrote it in COVID and I read it to my kids as I wrote it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've heard a lot of that. And it's been proven, hasn't it, that in times of, or in countries even, I can't remember where I heard this recently. Could have even been you on your own podcast. I'm gonna quote it back to you. So in times of, hardship, or even in countries that are, having a really, like the whole country is having some turmoil, the books that people are choosing to read and the movies people are choosing to see are like uplifting ones, because it's kind of like there's enough bad stuff going on right now. I need escapism and to get out of here. And then it's the opposite. So in some countries where everything's going really great, they're seeing all things like horror and everything up on the rise.
That's so interesting. I had not heard that.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
It makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, if you've got a lot on your mind anyway, you kind of just want to escape and have something lighter, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So it is possible to change genres.
It is.
Not even genres, but complete, like from adult to children's. What have you found the biggest difference between the two?
In the writing process, the big difference was I did illustrations for the middle grade book. So I made cartoons, which initially I sort of had in my mind that I would just draw some stick figures and the publisher would get an actual illustrator. But they ended up coming back and saying, hey, we think you can draw like a 12-year-old girl could draw. So we'll get you to do them, which actually worked out pretty well. So that was a major difference, a very time-consuming difference, I would add. But the other thing is, and it seems an obvious point, is the audience is kids. So you sort of understand that in the writing process. But when you get events, I sort of forgot that. So for adult books, you have an adult audience and you're interacting with adults. But then for kids' books, it's not just a kid audience, it's an adult audience too. So you have this sort of both groups of people in the room, which is completely different.
Yeah, that is really interesting, how to target them. So one of the really big things that we love to talk about here on the pod is the story of the yes. So when you got your first ever yes, so can you, so your yes to publishing, can you tell us a little bit about your writing journey and then the steps that you actually took to get there, and then the moment that a publisher actually accepted your manuscript and you found out you were going to be offered a contract? Where were you? What were you thinking? What were you doing?
I love these stories. I always ask about these stories. I have such an insatiable appetite for them. I started writing my first book. I was about 30 and I've worked mostly in engineering, but I also worked for a while in social policy sort of disadvantaged space. And the woman that worked next to me it was at a council, and she managed senior citizen centres. And one day she was like, oh, can you just come with me? I've got to do something. I can't even remember why she needed me. And I was like, yeah, okay, for sure, fine. So we drove to this particular senior citizen centre, and I hadn't met the president of the club. So a senior citizen centre, just a building, and they run all sorts of activities for older people. The woman that was the elected president met us at the door. She came up in a motorised wheelchair, and she didn't say hello or anything. She just was basically yelling. She was absolutely furious because the Chinese subgroup of senior citizens had been playing mahjong in the bingo room, and the bingo room was for bingo, and she was livid. So they had had sandwiches or food or something in the fridge that they were going to eat in their meeting. She had taken all of the sandwiches out of the shared fridge and put them in the bin, just as a way of punishment. Like the weirdest story. And I just remember looking at her, and she had the motorized wheelchair, absolutely furious. She had some, choice words that she was kind of swearing and all the rest of it. And I had this out of body moment where I just thought to myself, I sort of saw myself and I thought to myself, if you do something with this moment, it will change your life. And what I did with that moment was I wrote a short story about it. And I just knew that something would happen from that. So I wrote a short story. It was not a great short story. I had done a little bit of blogging, but I really hadn't written a thing since high school. I liked writing in high school. I liked fiction writing. I liked comedy, little acting things, and I liked cartoons. I wrote this short story. I didn't know anyone. So I gave it to one of the comms people at work and I said, "Oh, could you read my short story?" And she begrudgingly read it, gave some feedback, and made it clear that she didn't want to read anything else that I wrote. And I was like, okay, sure, great.
Thanks.
So I thought I'll apply for a TAFE course. I applied to do a TAFE course and I sent them some of my blog posts. I didn't send the short story. The TAFE course rejected me and said I didn't get in, but I could reapply in the future. This is so difficult to do, to apply for a TAFE course and not get in. I say this because I was not a person that, sometimes you're in a room with writers. In the early stages, maybe you're doing a course or something, and you look around the room and you think that person's going to make it and that person's going to make it. Like, they're so talented. I was not that person in a room ever. So I missed out on the TAFE course. I ended up reapplying and applying for another TAFE course, and I got into the RMIT program, which is a very well-known program in Melbourne. RMIT is one of the big universities. The course is run through the TAFE division, which means that there's lots of workshopping. It's very hands-on as compared to a university one, which is a bit more theoretical. So I started there. I did maybe 2 subjects, got pregnant, had a baby, went back, did a subject, got pregnant, went back. I probably completed 3 subjects all up. And so from a course perspective, I didn't get a heap out of it. Like, it was nice, but I didn't get much out of it. I did it at night, and I hate night courses. I, like you, Tina, are a very early riser. So night courses are not suited to me. But the thing that I did get out of it was my first writers group. And that was incredible. So initially we were 4 people and we eventually grew to 7. We would go away multiple times a year. We would workshop and read each other's work and do all of those kinds of things. And that group was critical for me to grow as a writer, but also to feel like being a writer, that I was, that it was a valid pursuit, I guess, and it was a thing that people did. So that was like the course that I did that got me something out of it, but not necessarily the certificate at the very end.
Yeah.
I was very committed to writing, so I was good on discipline and having a writing practice, but I had probably come from a background of achievement in many ways. So things had, if I worked at something, and this is the way that things work mostly in the world, not in the arts industry, but if you work at something, that works. That's an effective approach for progressing or getting better, or getting a better job, or getting into whatever that is. But I think the arts is really different. And I remember that phase of being an unpublished writer, having a manuscript that was decent. It probably wasn't ready. I needed help, but I didn't know the sort of help that I needed. And I was applying to manuscript development programs and trying to write short stories for competitions, and there was just nothing ever happened. And I think that stage is so hard. And I had little kids at the time, and I didn't have a heap of time to write anyway. And it just felt, I wanted it so bad, and I was doing what I felt were all the right things. And it was so frustrating. And I remember at a really low point, my husband was like, you got to decide, if this is a thing you want to do, you've actually got to enjoy the process, because we can't ride the highs and lows with you. This is too, like, you're out of, your response is kind of disproportionate. And I think that was really helpful for me. And I see that as a real turning point as a writer, in that I accepted it might not happen and made the choice of act like you want it to happen, but it might not. And so I probably adjusted in terms of my approach to writing. I relaxed a bit. I wrote what I wanted to write. I had much more balance in life. And as often happens, that was when things started to work better. And I was actually starting, I think I had a short story published in an anthology, which felt like a really big deal. I got a fellowship at Verona. That was the moment that things shifted. And for me, and it's not about caring less. For me, there's something in that of being okay regardless. And I think that's put me in good stead. That lesson has carried throughout my writing life. That very basic kind of coming back to the love of writing.
Yeah. It sounds, and I do hear it a lot in a lot of these stories. The key word, I think, is perseverance.
Yeah.
As well, isn't it? Like, even we interviewed Caitlin Lawless, who's a publicist with New South recently, and she had this incredible story of just knowing people 10 years ago and seeing them as fresh, authors that, haven't published anything, just starting to write, and then seeing their books on the shelves, 10 plus years later. And it's just keeping on going, persevering. And yeah, it is hard though, like you said, when you're used to working so hard and then you see the payoff.
Yeah.
But sometimes it doesn't happen. And it's not that you're not getting better, because you're getting better as a writer, right? The more you're writing, and so I guess, and that's some kind of payoff, right? But it's not, when you want to be published, it's not the ultimate, is it? Like, that's what you're going for.
And it's slow. Like, you feel such impatience for all of it, for getting better in and of itself. But I think perseverance is, you kind of can't really be a writer without perseverance. And I think self-belief as well. I say that it was very demoralizing, and my husband was like, you kind of got to decide. Even through that, secretly, I would not have admitted this out loud. I was like, I can't get published. There was still something in me. My frustration was that it was taking so long, and even that the craft of writing was taking so long to sort of learn. That was a source of frustration too, because you can see all these, a lot of the advice or a lot of what you look at in writing is people who win the Booker Prize or at that really top of their game, and their writing moves you so deeply, and you just like have chills and think, oh my God, this is amazing. I want to write like this. And in some ways that's inspirational. But I also think a very inspirational thing is to look at books that aren't that good in some ways, the kind of book that you read and then think, oh, I could do that. I can maybe even do a bit better than that, which is not to critique that particular book. It's more to notice people just a bit ahead of you, and you can get to that bit ahead of you, and then that next bit ahead, and that next bit ahead.
Yeah, I do feel like some books, like all books, have a role to play. Like, you have your Booker Prize winners, and you have your books that are made into major motion pictures, and then you have, all the other books which are also still super important for many people and for many reasons, and they can't all be award winners and movies, but they're still important, and they're still entertaining, and they're still helping kids when it comes to kids, like kids to read and kids to enjoy and to get them away from screens, and lots of little books just that spark some creativity or just a character that they remember. It all has a role to play, sort of thing.
It does. And some books are niche. I often think that in terms of like humor and jokes, I think some of the most hilarious jokes I've made ever in life, about 3 people would get. Like, I think that's true of books too. There's like a lid for every pot.
Yeah. So when you found your writers group, was there people in your writers group that were starting to get a few wins around you? Like, could you see that happening around you as well?
Yeah, which I think is another
Mm.
very expansive thing in terms of how you think. Often I think one person in a writers group gets published and then a few do. Kate Mildenhall was in my writers group. We started the writers group, and so she was the first person to get published. She was always kind of a standout. But you do start to go, okay, it is a thing that people do.
It's possible. Yeah, when you
Mm.
see someone else doing it right in front of you, you think, okay, it's so close.
Exactly. And it is, like, genuinely the fact of being around other people that are getting published does.
Infectious, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. Um, you were asking about the courses and things that I did. I did do some manuscript assessments with people, which were great. I would get, feedback that was very helpful. I did those through the Australian Writers Centre or the Victorian Writers Centre. But the ACT ran a program called Hard Copy. I don't know that they still run it, but part of that program, you got to meet for half an hour with 10 agents and publishers. And so that was, you had to apply for that, and I got into that. What was interesting going into that is that I had pitched all of the agents on the ASA or the Literary Association website. They had all said no, but I was meeting with a couple while I was going to be there. And the couple that I met with, one was Jacinta Damaze, who offered to represent me when I met with her in the meeting, and another was also interested. And the other interesting thing of that experience was Mandy Brett was a publisher that was participating in that program as well. I ended up being published by text, and Mandy was my editor. But I had met Mandy 3 years before at an ASA literary speed dating. I had pitched my book to her, and she hadn't been especially interested in it.
Was this the same book, sorry, that you pitched that Jacinta wanted and Mandy? Okay.
So they had
Which one was it?
I had done pitches. I had done a verbal pitch to Mandy previously, and I had done a written pitch to Jacinta, and neither had been interested. And that book was not markedly different by the time they ended up picking it up. Yeah. So I think the advice is often you get one shot kind of per person per book, but sometimes you get more than one shot. And also, I think that verbal pitch at the speed dating sessions, I kind of don't really count that. If I was an author kind of shopping a book, I wouldn't exclude that kind of public.
Yes, because how long was so it was speed dating, so was it like 3 minutes?
Yeah, not long at all.
Yeah. And do you think sometimes, like, I mean, I'm sure they are putting all their effort into it, but often there's many other groups going on around you. There's other pitches happening. They're sitting there, they're trying to listen and focus, but they're probably not taking it in as much as when they see it on paper maybe and can digest it a little bit better. So they're really just going on your 3 minutes of,
and sometimes you just
trying to get it out.
Don't land a pitch, Sometimes you just have a different energy when you sell it as well.
Yep. So that's amazing. So the other thing that I'm hearing there is the networking, and they're using all the like events that we have, because we have a lot, like the ASA, speed dating. There's so many conferences that offer it as well, and workshops that offer the speed dating or just the assessments. I'm always spruiking the assessments and the pitches at these competitions, because like you said, it does make a difference. Do you think meeting someone in person as well, and you don't know sometimes where anything's going to go or what relationship is going to form or what context you're going to make, but eventually 3 years later you might end up sending them a pitch and they'll be like, I remember her, and it just gives you that one extra little thing that helps you stand out to them.
And I think it's a reflection of like that time that passes. You have a better pitch, maybe your opening is a bit better, and all of those sorts of things. The market has changed a little, but I think a lot of that pitching advice that is online is very American based, whereas in the Australian industry, it is a little bit easier to get in front of people through conferences or pitching sessions, those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's the easiest way, isn't it? Because the slush pile, we'll call it, is can be quite big.
It sounds easy, the slush pile, but it really is a last resort.
Yeah. So tell me then, so with this book where Jacinta was keen, when did so she signed you on that book?
So she was like, oh, we shook hands in the meeting, which you weren't meant to do. And she said, can you, like, are there things that you need to do on it? And I was like, oh yeah, I've got to do a couple of little things. And I was reworking it and just probably faffing about. And she came back to me just one day, a bit out of the blue, maybe it was a month later, and she said, I'm going to send it. Just give me what you've done. I'm going to send it. And so she sent it to, I think, 9 publishing houses. It was 7 or 9. Sent it to 7 or 9. And after 3 or 4 weeks, so maybe she gave them 6 weeks, and 2 weeks before the end, she said, someone from Penguin wants to talk to you. And at that minute, I was like, we're in the game. And I remember being at a park and talking to this Penguin editor. And then I ended up, this felt a bit more common at the time. I ended up going in to meet at Penguin and speak to the person that would be the editor, which was lovely. Jacinta came with me to meet Mandy at Text. So I had a meeting there. I had phone conversations with a couple of other publishers and ended up getting 4 offers. I think they were all 2-book offers. I had said that I was working on a second book. I probably didn't have much of that second book. I do always say to people, say you've got a second book, even if it is the most like conceptual, half-baked idea, go in saying, of course, yeah, I've got, partway through. So they were all 2-book deals. And I went with Text because I had wanted Text all along and I had wanted Mandy all along because I'd heard Tony Jordan talking about Mandy Brett and how amazing she was, and she's absolutely amazing. And so that's who I wanted all along. I just was like, I want Mandy, which is why when I did that ASA literary speed dating pitching session with Mandy, I felt really gutted that she had not immediately kind of jumped on the book offer. But it all turned out in the end.
So that's incredible. So did you say like 7 people were interested and you had 4 offers in the end?
She sent it to 7 and
she sent it to 7 and you got 4. Right. That's incredible. And do you think that strike rate is because you had an agent? Like, was there any way that you could do that without an agent, send it off like that?
Yeah. No, I don't think. One person that probably could is Graham Simpson. I remember him talking about, he won the unpublished manuscript competition in Victoria, the Victorian Premier's one. And he did some pretty hardball negotiating between Text and whoever was interested. Text ended up buying that book. I think he's got a lot of business acumen. He's got a personality that would just very much enjoy doing that. I don't think many writers would. Most writers, self-included, would be stepping over their own mother to sign the very first contract that's put in front of them. Like the idea of playing people off. But the cool bit about Text was, I remember Jacinta saying, you would give world rights to Text, you would not give world rights to any other publisher. This was at that moment in time, possibly it's changed now. And so Text had world rights, and they had an agent in lots of places, but in the US, the agent went through a very similar process of sending it to publishing houses. And there was a lot of interest there and in the UK as well. And it ended up going to auction in the US, which is the most exciting thing that you could ever really have happen because there's no bad outcomes from an auction. And that was incredible. And the deal was written up in the paper. Like, it was such a massive, not a massive amount of, like, it was a decent amount of money, but it was, for me as a writer, it was in the paper. And I remember my publicist saying, don't say how much they paid, like, just do. Anyway, it was amazing, but which is a great author story, wow, amazing. The kind of postscript to that story, though, is that it was a particular imprint that purchased the book. They, about 3 months later, had a complete restructure and that imprint vanished. And so the book that had been bought by the head of an imprint, it was like written in her bio on their website that they had acquired this book. She left. And so they rejuggled, and the book landed with the most junior person really in the company. If she read the book, she did not like it. And I had gotten a travel grant to go to the States to do research for my second book. And I was like, well, could we meet up? And she said no. And then I persisted enough that she was like, okay, we'll meet. I think it was a long weekend or something for them. So we ended up meeting, and she she was like, I'm not blaming her in any of this, nor am I saying the book would have done amazingly if this hadn't happened. There are lots and lots of stories that writers have of U-turns, and then what felt like it was going one way goes another direction. Anyway, I met her in I met her in New York, and I remember her meeting me at the downstairs of the building, taking me up to a windowless office, and I had met the agent that had sold the book the day before, and this is a thing I think they often do, is he had put copies of my book as you walk in, so it looked like it was just sitting all along. It's your book.
Yeah.
It's been sitting there all along.
What we're doing.
So
always.
He had sort of pulled out the stops in that way. I met this, not a copy of my book anywhere. And so we sat down, and I was probably there for 20 minutes, having flown from Australia. I mean, I didn't go there for that reason. Yeah. And we didn't really talk about the book. We just spoke a bit about her weekend, and she left she was so disinterested that, there were just these long pauses in the conversation where
I wasn't even trying.
It's just like, oh my God. So I tell the story of the highs, but the truth is, it was crushing, absolutely crushing at the time. But a lot of people don't tell the
And what a roller coaster.
Yeah.
What a roller coaster. Like, auction, and, this is incredible. And then, like, you cannot predict that happening.
Interestingly, when I started working with writers at the start of the year, now I'm working with unpublished and debut authors. But I did a lot of market research with both groups, but initially with debut authors. And I also I probably interviewed 30 people for an hour, and just on this debut experience. And some of them had just had books that had come out. And a number of them, most of them, or a very common story within that was, this book was going to be a big book. Like, the publisher was really putting a lot behind it, and XYZ was happening. But then COVID happened. Or then this Jewish kind of, what's the date with the Gaza? And I mean, I'm not wading into that whatsoever. But these real kind of left field things happened that
could not be predicted.
Couldn't be predicted. And whether you say, oh, it didn't happen because of that, or it was never going to happen. But, I think it's a really, the highs and lows and changings of fortunes means that you kind of do have to get to a point of enjoying the highs, but being resilient and being resistant to the lows as well.
Yes. Yeah, that's very good. And I wanted to ask you a bit more about that, actually, because I'm part of a debut crew. I'm lucky I get to be part of 2, because my pub date got pushed to 25. So I was in 24, and now I'm part of 25, and 24 were very kind to keep me. And I did ask the crew, some of the crew, if they had some questions that they wanted me to ask you, because we've always got lots of questions about this, and you always get a lot of advice. So one of them was about how to prepare yourself for when your book does come out, and about author disappointment and the reality maybe of publication, which isn't always disappointment. No, obviously there's so much amazing stuff about it, and I guess maybe where does that disappointment come from?
This makes me think of, I remember this episode that Kate and I did of the First Time podcast, and it was I'm pretty sure it was when that international rights stuff was happening. And we talked about that we used to record in a studio, and we talked about that in the studio. And then at the end of our discussion, I remember turning to Kate and said, should I have sounded happier? And she was like, oh, whatever, just sound how you sound. And when our editing person was doing the edits, I said to her, leave that in, leave me asking that in. And it was, if you listen to the podcast, I haven't listened to it in years, but if you listen to it, it reads like we've got the cut wrong in terms of where we cut out the audio. But it's not, it's intentional. And I think for me, and particularly in that stage of the podcast that was about this debut experience, this should have been just a universally happy moment, and it really was a happy moment, but it felt super weird as well. And I think that mix of emotions, and disappointment will be one of them, I would say, catches people by surprise, and no one talks about it. And I think particularly when we were doing the First Time podcast, there wasn't really any information on the debut experience. And so we were asking other people all of these questions and they would have lots of answers. But once we turned off the kind of the recording thing, they would be so candid and it was so generous of them. And as a debut author, it felt sometimes, and I think this is partly the structure of the industry, in that you are a single writer in a big publishing house and someone else is a single writer in a big publishing house, that you have nothing to compare your own experience to. And it can feel you feel so grateful all the time to be being published that there's no recognition of other kinds of emotions like disappointment. And I think talking to those emotions is really important, because I do think everyone will feel them. And I loved when people spoke about them to me. I still remember a comment that Ella Baxter made on an Instagram post where she talked about the shame that she felt when her book came out. And I loved that so much. I could understand that comment of shame and vulnerability. And it's interesting. I send a newsletter out a couple of times a week, and I often talk about disappointment. And often a lot of people who are multiple time authors will respond to me and say, I'm so glad you're telling them this, which is such an interesting comment, because you don't know. And the fact that people will mention it, I think, is helpful. Yeah.
And do you think it's important do you think it's important to just recognize that there can be disappointment, or just that maybe not setting your expectations really low, but is it just being realistic, maybe just understanding what the reality is out there? So anything that does and just happen is a positive, and you can enjoy that experience because you do know that, it's natural for it to not be doing all the best selling, as many as you think. And the markets, I've heard, is not great. Yeah, at the moment. Tough. And it's never been, super amazing, but it's, I've heard it's really tough now. It's a really tough sell. So maybe it's just that reality of it, in turn has that effect of you just being able to enjoy it more. Does that make sense?
It does. I think that a way I think about it is to see that your career is one that will build over time. Mm-hmm. And I hate the idea of having low expectations, but I think there is something in seeing it as a long-term game, that this is one book of many that you put into the world. And so while the expectation for career is big, the expectation for single book is just to keep progressing, to write better books and focus on the things that you can control. Sales is not a thing that you have any control over. But the measure of success that sales is a single measure of success, and it's one that you have no control over. I think it's a really crude measure of success, and there needs to be a much more nuanced, I suppose, way of thinking about how a book fares in the world. I think the emphasis on sales I see most in the debut author moment. It feels very pass or fail for debut authors. I think that really fades. And I think as you get an author further down the line, of course, everyone wants every single book they write to be a bestseller and universally adored and all of those things. But down the line, people don't talk about sales so much. Whereas the debut experience, people think, if this does not sell well, my career is over.
And that's, I guess, they're probably taking that snapshot in time as well of right now, like maybe just the first year or of sales possibly, or even shorter than that. And being maybe disappointed at that point, but it's, as you said, get further down the line, that first year doesn't mean anything, and it's not about that. It's about so much more. Yeah, that's a really good point, that your success is about more than that.
And I think some of the best things about writing is community, really. And I think the building of community over time is a great measure of how far you've come as well.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think it's just taking it all back to that very first point, even that you mentioned, of just sitting back and going, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
It's because of the love of it and the joy of it. And, back then at the beginning, you're trying to get published, and now it's just, and so you're taking it right back to the love of writing, getting rid of those expectations, maybe.
I think as well that you sort of see sales as a proxy for I want to sell a lot of books so I can write more books. And that's the avenue to do that. But actually, you have far more control over expanding the space that writing and creativity takes up in your life. And I think that's probably the underlying goal and the thing to work towards. Or that's what I think the thing to work towards is.
So do you find talking about expectations, that's a common theme that you're getting from debut authors? Like what just their feelings afterwards, which is, like you said, a mix of everything, isn't
I do
it?
think it comes up. I think, yes, it definitely comes up. I think people avoid talking about it in some ways. I do think there's this element of shame in terms of, and sometimes people will get, a publisher might say, or an agent might say, it hasn't gone as well as what we'd hoped. I think that can really blindside people. And because you are an individual working with a publishing house, you're not a member of a team, that feels like it's your fault. And I think I'd argue that actually a book is a team deal, and, it's marketing and it's publicity and it's all of, there are other people on the team. But I don't think if it comes to disappointing sales, it's easy for an author to think, yeah, I'm at fault.
Yeah, and look, we spend so much time writing these books and possibly lifetimes getting to that point of writing that book. So, of course, it's only natural to be so invested in it and, just be so close to it that you just want it to do so well. So it's a natural feeling, really, isn't it?
I think that my thinking of that probably has changed. At the debut moment, I did feel like that. Now I think I just put it into the world. And a thing that has helped me put stuff into the world was a podcast where I would put stuff into the world every week. I think we put 300 episodes into the world, and a book can only do so much. And often I think people think about, if you want to build a profile as a writer, it's pretty hard to do that if all you do is release a book every 1 or 2 years, or one book every 4 years. And I think that act of creating and making other things that you put into the world and see how they're received, and they go well or they don't go well, exercises that muscle of caring less. Feels like the wrong way of putting it, but
being resilient.
It's if you've only got 2 things in the world and they're both books, then how they fare means a lot. But if you have other things that are in the world, even if they're smaller things, it doesn't feel so significant, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, for yourself, I think it's very, a very correct statement in that, just putting things out into the world, and it can be your indicator of success, especially now that you're branching out into your book coaching, which is amazing, because everything that you've done is just sort of builds up to this incredible opportunity that you're participating in, and now offering everyone, all these other debut authors, and sharing that knowledge, which is incredible. Because like you said, it really, there hasn't really been much of that to assist authors before. And there's so many questions, for emerging authors, aspiring published authors, and debut authors. But can you explain a little bit about book coaching for people that don't really know what that is?
Sure. So when I work with debut authors and I work with unpublished writers, with debut authors, we basically just meet once a month for 6 months, and we focus on, it kind of varies. Some people want to focus on building a profile or podcasting, those kinds of things. Some people just want a person in their corner, actually. That's probably a pretty common thing. A safe-ish space to talk about some things.
Mhm.
What else do we work on? Everything I've ever done is now gone out of my head. It's like being asked what book you've read recently. So I think if in terms of the framing, it's about what to do and what to expect and how to think when your book comes out. Because it's a really unique moment, I think, as you move from unpublished writer to published writer. A lot of people, no one even knows that they write. They've written in secret all of this time, and it's sort of a real shift in they haven't had their work in the world and now suddenly they do. And I think that's a moment that's full of very weird feelings.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
In the unpublished space, working one-to-one, it's often more about a particular book. Sometimes people will come with a draft most of the way through and it's about polishing it and getting it ready and then starting to pitch for agents and for publishers as well. So putting together query letters and synopsises and potentially video pitches, which is the thing that my agent got me to do for the kids' book, actually, when they pitched it to publishers. I made a little video talking about myself and the book.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, no, that's handy. Just somebody who you can ask all the questions to.
I think so. I had people help me along the way. I cannot understate how helpful the podcast was in terms of building relationships, but having people fill in a lot of those gaps. And so I think some of it is about doing that for other people.
Okay, so do you have a number one top tip for aspiring authors and a top tip for debut authors?
A top tip for aspiring authors, I think that the two or the one mistake that lots of people make, everyone makes, I think most writers have made, is that they send their work too early. They think it's ready, it's not ready. So don't blow your shot sending to your number one people straight off the bat. Test the waters a bit first. And the other thing is seeing rejection as a sign that you should stop. I think in that unpublished space, you're looking for validation to keep going. It's the hardest moment in many ways because you have no proof that you can do it. It's a real leap of faith. But rejection is part of the process. Every single writer that has gotten their work published experiences often a lot of rejection. For debut authors, the debut moment is a really funny moment. I think the greatest thing that you guys have is the debut crew, that you have other people in the exact same boat. I think that's super helpful. I think acknowledging that there'll be highs and lows inevitably, and that you don't just have to feel singularly grateful. You can be like grateful for sure, but I think that emphasis on gratefulness can sometimes negate other emotions or the validity of feeling other emotions. We've talked about disappointment and the kind of the harder sides of being a writer. The most wonderful things about writing are other writers and readers and even editors. If you feel like your work is really seen by someone and someone understands how you feel about a thing or what you're trying to do, I think those are the moments to kind of grab with both hands.
Now I'm going to be selfish and ask a question about
Yes.
me.
Do.
So I'm like 8 or 9 weeks from release now, which is really exciting.
Yep.
What have you got for me? What do I need to
Okay,
what do I need to know?
moment.
What's your top advice for me?
I didn't do this with kids' books because it's a slightly different space. I do think the media is a good space to sell books is a simple way of putting it, but writing an article or two about themes if in your book or some element of your story that then segues into a bio or something that says I've written a book on this topic is a good thing to do. That's a thing that I always recommend. I don't recommend people focus purely on social media and see social media as a way of selling books. I think see social media as a way of building community. So I would be looking at building a community on social media and maybe writing some articles that relate to the themes of your book. That's harder in the kids space because you have this challenge with audience in that parents or adults read papers, but your audience is kids. For my Alma book, that has illustrations as well. I said to my publicist, could you try and pitch some cartoons and try and get them in places?
Mhm.
And she said, probably not, because they'll want to pay you and we only do unpaid stuff. But she said, if you make some of those cartoons into colouring ins, we can get them places. And so I made them into colouring ins, and they got into a few newspapers that way. So
Yeah, that's cool. Thinking outside the box.
I think so. A liberating thing is, in the quantities that you want to sell books, the tens of thousands of books, there's not much you can do.
Yeah.
Nothing
Yeah,
is
right.
going to make a massive difference, is the truth. It's word of mouth, I think, that really sells books. That's my opinion. So, but that's exciting to me, in that you can pick and choose what you like to do.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Because I feel like I'm getting a little bit overwhelmed with, there's so many things to do, and you see other people doing things, and I'm like, am I running out of time? And it just feels like you could do 1,001 things, but I like seeing it as that really it's word of mouth, and it's probably time too, is it? Like, a little bit of time. Like, your book has to actually be out in the world for a while. People have to read it. Kids have to enjoy it and then recommend it to their friends, and that's just time, isn't it?
That does
There's
take
nothing you can do.
I also think that, given things may have a limited impact anyway, do stuff you like doing. Like, if you're an events person, do events.
Yeah.
If you're a podcast person, I actually think a podcast is the best thing that you can do. That's the way that I and Kate built Profiles initially. And I think it's such a great way of building a relationship, but also evergreen content that lives on after a real life event and those kinds of things. I think podcasts is a space that's got space in it. It's undercooked. There's room.
Yeah. And it's fun. I just
And it's
feel
fun.
I forget that people are listening. I just find it really fun to talk. And just ask all the questions. But just chatting and with Madeline as well, working with Madeline. It's just been lots of fun. And so you're right. If it's something that you enjoy doing, just enjoy it. And see where it takes you. Okay.
More
so
of
I'm just gonna buckle in and enjoy the ride.
It's a fun ride. It's like the greatest thing that I've ever done.
Yeah.
Well, I should say my children as well. My husband getting married.
And that. Yeah.
Outside of us, it is. It's great. It's really great.
Well, thank you so much for all your extremely valuable advice and tips today. I'm sure all the listeners are going to love it.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Book Deal podcast. Please like, follow, or share this episode so we can encourage more aspiring authors.
And if you have a question you'd like us to answer or ask our guests, please find us on Instagram @The Book Deal, or email us at thebookdeal@outlook.com.